Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good day, and welcome to AgFlow's third webinar, where we're going to talk about some market news. My name is Hugo Boudet, and I will be hosting today. All right, so let's get into it. Today, we're just going to talk about the weather watching that's happening right now, exports, and how the price trends are going relative to those two subjects. So I'm going to talk about the US because it's a good example. It's also one of the main countries where this is being tracked and where weather watching has an actual impact on the prices. Right, so it's in full force right now. Currently, the wheat prices depend strongly on the conditions that we have for the harvest that is coming next year. So weather is actually setting the conditions for trend prices to move. Along with that, we have exports, which are also being an influence because they will provide the carryover stocks for the next crop, which will therefore have some create the tightness in the supply or will allow some lenience on the coming crop. So the key information that we have right now in Q4 2022 and until maybe even spring 20, so the end of 20 of the first quarter 2023, is the weather that we have along with what's being exported. And that concerns mainly wheat at the moment for the US, but also the northern hemisphere with Europe and France, particularly as the main producer of wheat in Europe, but also in the Black Sea, Ukraine, and Russia. Um, so I'm going to talk about the US specifically, but also I'm going to mention things that are happening both in the northern hemisphere, but also a little bit about what's going on in the southern hemisphere. So right now, what we see, thanks to those two very nice maps provided by the NOAA, it's a branch of NASA which tracks the weather effects in the US, but also globally. What we see is that in the US right now, uh, there is a lot of precipitation going on, specifically in the northeast, going south towards Texas. So all of the areas that had a lot of droughts going on during starting in early 2022 are seeing a lot of rains coming in. Um, on top of that, we see that the temperatures are not being very cold at the moment. We see there's a lot of cold coming from the North Pacific area, which is something that is quite normal actually in a La Nina year, but it's kind of stopping in the Midwest slash in the plains area where we are in near normal conditions, and then we have like this kind of heat wave coming down from the southeast towards the rest of the plains. So what we have right now is conditions where we have good rains, so good moisture for the soils, and we're not in the stage where we have frost coming in too early. There's been some snow coming in, but it's not being too cold at the moment, which is good for the soils and for the dormant crops, specifically for wheat, as they can suffer a lot during the winter from the frost. However, it's still very early. We're not even in December yet, but those are sending very bearish signals for the market, and not only for the futures market, but also for the cash market. Now, if we look at the US exports, I'm going to show you just after this slide what AgFlow has been tracking over the past few months. But what we see is that the wheat exports have been improving. The US have been exporting more and more wheat in the past few months. However, it's still lower than what was in the previous marketing year, where we had a lot more demand from US corn. And so we are actually 6.63% lower in terms of exports volumes than last year. So this is actually also very bearish news towards the carryover supply. And overall, we have a situation where the price trends, as I will show you in just a moment, are really bearish, and actually we have this downward pressure due to those signals. On top of that, we have to think that globally, The Ukraine deal has been continued onwards till, I believe, March 2023. So this is kind of a good news, although Ukraine is not exporting wheat that much, specifically this year, compared to Russia, for example. It does mean that Russia can keep exporting, and countries are in very much demand of Russian products, such as Turkey, such as Egypt, one of the top wheat importers in the world, can continue having this deal. So we still have a supply that's floating around and prevent the pressure from other suppliers, such as the US or Europe. Along with that, we have in Europe we have very good conditions. Also, in the weather watching phase, we have very good soil conditions in France, where good rain is being coming in. The planting has been continued very well as well. And we have right now we have good signals with very good provisions for the next campaign, the next crop, where France could actually have a very bumper crop, which could be very good news for the EU supply, but also for extra supply that would be exported towards North Africa. And then, in addition to that, we have India, which also increases its acreage for wheat planting this year. We know that last year India was actually potentially a source of wheat to replace Ukraine when the war started. There was a lot of discussions about that. Some countries, such as Egypt, went as far as starting to import, but the quality of the wheat was a bit undesirable, and that's mainly due to the fact that they suffered a lot from droughts late in the season, which also prevented India from actually exporting the crop in the end. But this year, with more supply available, we could see India also actually stepping into the export markets, specifically for the Southeast Asian region. I'm thinking about Indonesia specifically, but also in the Middle East. And that could actually be very interesting, because it's actually filling not a gap, but a market which was also depending on Ukraine, and as a domino effect, would actually make sure that there's more supply available on the market globally. Now I'm just briefly going to mention it, but we're going to see it in the price trends that just after. But Argentina is obviously suffering a lot from the drought. Their supply, the production this year should be cut about half compared to last year. And then in Australia, we have very different conditions, where instead of having droughts, we have had floods that were very damaging for the crops. And we actually will have a lot less wheat available, or at least for human consumption, for milling wheat, than previously thought of. And that obviously has had an impact on the price trends. So globally, what we can say is that Northern Hemisphere, in the Northern Hemisphere, U.S. wheat prices are currently trending lower. It's also quite neutral in Europe, specifically for France, and that's due to the good conditions, to the good signals, and overall the global idea that there will be a good supply available in 2023. All right, so let's move on to the numbers I wanted to show you. All right. So what you see here is AgFlow exports for US wheat by month. And what we can see overall is that this line here is all exports from US wheat. This is by country. So this is, for example, Mexico, the first destination for US wheat exports. But overall, what we're interested in is this. We see that overall, since March last year, the US wheat exports were actually in a downward trend. Definitely, the US were struggling to sell their crops. That's also due to the fact that they were very non-competitive compared to other origins, specifically from South America, where Brazil and Argentina were able to provide good quality products with very cheap prices compared to the US, but also the very high production levels from Australia. However, since the start of the new crop, we see that we have this upward trend, where we have a lot of exports available and export being made. And that's also something that we can see where Mexico has been one of the destinations that have been importing more, along with South Korea and Japan, specifically in the month of August. But overall, we see these trends going upward. As I mentioned, we're still lower than last year in terms of total numbers, but it's still interesting to see that the US is gaining momentum in their wheat exports right now, specifically when we approach I would say the Christian countries, the Western countries, the Christmas period. We just passed Thanksgiving, and these are periods of high consumption. So there's a stronger demand for wheat. So it's very interesting to see that is also the case where countries that like Japan and South Korea also improve their imports. Um, Now, I just want to mention the price trends. So this is the US wheat FOB prices that we have, cash prices versus the future CME Chicago soft red winter wheat. So this is not the hard, but I checked the hard red winter wheat as well, and it does provide the same trends. So what we see if we zoom in a little bit is a trend where let me just get rid of the future for a second. It's a slight downward trend. There's a bit of volatility still, but what we see is still kind of a downward trend on the spot cash prices, and this is something that's also been reflected with the futures, as you can see in this orange curve here, where the prices have been going down, and that's due to those bearish factors that I was mentioning before. Now, if we look at France, Australia, and Argentina wheat, it's very interesting, and it's as I was mentioning earlier. So, if we just look at Australia, for example, we see that since September, the prices have been quite volatile, but also the trend is really upwards, which kind of shows what I was mentioning: the fact that we lost a lot of supply due to the drought, due to the floodings. Now, if we look at Argentina, however, surprisingly, prices have not been rising as much as we could expect from the bearish news, and that's kind of due to the fact that currently there's not a strong demand for Argentina, and the rally hasn't started for the season. So my guess is that right now prices are just kind of trending low because nobody really wants to import from Argentina. However, when we will start seeing the crop coming out fully, this is going to be very interesting metrics to keep track of. Um, and finally, for France, as I was mentioning, very neutral, not really a gain or decrease. What we see is that the price is relatively stable, and that's usually due to the European market playing as as a as a relative buffer for prices increase. Obviously, in March of 2022, we saw the spike, sorry, due to the war in Ukraine. However, in Europe, it was a bit more dim than it was in other markets, and that's due to the buffer that happens on the European market. So, as I was mentioning, price increase in Australia. Very interesting signal from Argentina, where we don't have yet a bearish or bullish signal from the pricing. Although I will want to track these prices in the days/months to come. And that's it for the data from AgFlow. Now, I want to mention our network. So the first tweet that I wanted to mention is about Argentina. So as I was mentioning, Argentina really is suffering from droughts right now and high temperatures as well. We are coming into the summer, and right now what we see, this is like a temperature in degrees Celsius, and we see that we are in very high temperatures. We are above 34 degrees, even nearing the 38 degrees in some areas. So not only is Argentina suffering from droughts, but also from high temperatures, which are definitely impacting even more crops and even more wheat. So the 11.5 million metric ton that has been mentioned here and there in terms of total production this year might even be lower depending on whether or not this trend will continue. That's actually another tweet concerning Argentina. Another interesting fact that people didn't mention much is that Argentina also suffered a lot from the frost. Not only was it suffering from the droughts during the winter, but also from the frost that happened during that time, which was also very destructive. That's actually something that if you're in the US, you can relate to, because most of the US wheat crop has been suffering from frost, not only drought but frost in the past 2 years, which has been very damaging for the crops. And that's actually a major factor, according to Frederick Grain, to the lower supply available this year. So it's interesting to track where the weather watching in winter for the northern hemisphere, but also for winter in the southern hemisphere. So in June to September for us. Now, still regarding Argentina, we have a very interesting news with soybean. So obviously, this is impacting the wheat crop that we see that should come out in Argentina, but also the soybean planting, which, as I've mentioned last week, for the people that were here last week, has been usually a very consistent metric, but this year has been really lacking the pace and really below the trend that we've been seeing in the past 5 years, even almost 10 years. So really, the droughts are really impacting Argentina, and might not be as reliable for soybean products. Argentina, I remind, is the first exporter of soybean byproducts such as soybean meal and soybean oil. So definitely, there will be a change of paradigm probably in the next marketing year for soybean for Argentina soybean. Now, very interesting news coming from Ag Strategy, talking about Australia. So as you know, China had some soft bans on the Australian products, such as canola, wheat, and barley. We at AgFlow have measured that this has not stopped the exports. However, it has limited them in the past 2 years. And what we see is that China has lifted restriction on Australian canola. So it's very interesting that probably this will follow for barley and wheat, and definitely we're going to see the pipelines, the export pipelines from Australia, gathering in force towards China in the coming weeks/months, and also definitely that would probably mean that the AS tracking issues that have been existing since the soft ban and since the tensions with the US in Taiwan might be returning to maybe a more normal situation. We also know that China has been pondering on whether or not to change their COVID restrictions policies, and that would also have an impact on imports and consumption in China. Finally, sorry, not finally, but just quickly to mention that Ukraine, as probably it was expected by a number of you, is actually falling in terms of production. Just a reminder that Ukraine has had a very, very good production year for wheat last year. However, it was also predicted to be down this year before the war actually happened. So it's not really a surprise to see that Russia is falling down. However, it's still impressive considering the conditions in which they done this production. So I guess that it really shows the strength of Ukraine agricultural production in this instance. Also, to mention that the Central Bank of Nigeria has said that it will release some strategic foreign reserves to combat the food inflation. So that's really important because obviously I said that last week Nigeria has faced some flooding, which has impacted a lot of the production, and therefore I mentioned that it would also have an impact on imports, probably increasing them. Right now, the strategy seems to be that Nigeria wants to cut into its strategic reserve in order to curb the inflation and also try not to spend too much on imports, because as we know, the prices increasing will also have an impact on inflation by importing more products. All right, so that's it for today, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like this webinar, you can like the video that's going to happen, be on YouTube. You can subscribe to our channel, and you can click on the bell to be notified next time we go live. Obviously, we also send the emails, but that way you have all of the notifications available for you. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. You can send an email to irvin@agflow.com or contact us to this phone number via message or WhatsApp, and we will try and provide you with the answers that you seek. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.